Change often announces itself through fear before it announces itself through clarity. And the particular fear that shows up here is a very specific one. The fear that if you change, you will disappear. The mind equates identity with existence. So when identity begins to loosen, it interprets that loosening as self-loss. This is why transitions feel existential rather than practical. You're not just worried about what will happen. You're worried about who you'll be if the old version of you no longer responds the way it used to. Familiarity quietly disguises itself as who I am, even when that familiarity was built around coping, adaptation, or survival. So when the old self stops reacting automatically, anxiety rises. Not because something bad is happening, but because the structure that once defined you is no longer answering when called. This fear intensifies right before growth stabilizes, because the mind senses it's losing something it thought was essential. But what's actually happening is more precise than that. You're not losing yourself. You're losing what you confused for yourself. Most people never question this confusion. Identity feels personal, intimate, unquestionable. But identity is not a person. It's a phase. It forms from repetition, from necessity, from learning how to survive a particular chapter of life. Much of what you call me was assembled to navigate earlier conditions, to belong, to avoid pain, to maintain control, to be accepted. Those strategies hardened into traits. Those traits became a story. And over time, the story felt permanent. But protecting outdated self-definitions is exhausting because they require you to keep living inside conditions that no longer exist. When life changes and identity refuses to update, suffering follows. Not because you're broken, but because you're trying to preserve a role that already finished its job. What's ending isn't you. It's the version of you that was designed for a different time. One of the clearest signs of this shift is emotional detachment. You care less about things that once consumed you. Situations that used to provoke strong reactions now feel distant. This is often misread as apathy, loss, or emotional decline. But emotional detachment here is not the problem. It's the sign. It indicates that you are no longer entangled in narratives that once required constant emotional investment. Beneath that distance is relief, a subtle lightness. You're no longer pulled into cycles that drained you. Detachment creates clarity before meaning returns. It clears the noise so something truer can be felt. The calm that follows can feel unfamiliar, even unsettling, if your identity was built around intensity or struggle. But you are not becoming empty. You are becoming unentangled. While the mind debates this shift, the body usually moves ahead. The nervous system exits first. You may feel fatigue that doesn't correspond to effort, restlessness without a clear cause, or numbness where emotion used to live. These are not signs of collapse. They are exit signals. The body withdraws energy from emotional contracts that no longer serve it, roles that required constant vigilance, patterns that demanded self-override. The nervous system is efficient. It doesn't wait for logic to catch up. And when logic tries to override this somatic truth, tension increases. You explain, you justify, you push, but the body doesn't negotiate. If your system has already left, the mind will eventually have to follow. Your body already moved on. Your mind is just catching up. This creates what many people experience as the most confusing phase, the void between versions. You're no longer who you were, but you're not yet living as who you're becoming. Identity gaps feel lonely because there is nothing solid to point to. The ego panics here because it can't label you anymore. Without a label, it doesn't know how to protect you. This is why the urge to find yourself becomes strong, to define, to choose something quickly, to rebuild an identity as fast as possible. But rushing to fill the void almost always recreates the old self in a new costume. The in-between is not a mistake. It's a psychological necessity. It allows the old structure to fully dissolve so the new one doesn't have to compete with it. The void isn't loss. It's space without a shape yet. Right here is where the temptation to go back appears. The mind compares familiar pain with unfamiliar freedom and often prefers the former. Nostalgia softens the edges of the past. It highlights comfort and minimizes cost. Old patterns call you back, not because they fit, but because they are known. Wanting to go back does not mean you should. It means the old version is dissolving and making one last attempt to survive. Re-entering expired identities may feel stabilizing in the short term, but it comes with a price. The return of the same limitations, the same friction, the same quiet dissatisfaction. The cost of going back is coherence. And once coherence matters more than comfort, that cost becomes too high. What begins to emerge on the other side of this process is not a louder or more impressive version of you. It's a quieter one. Authenticity does not perform. It doesn't need to explain itself constantly. It doesn't rely on dramatic identity narratives to feel real. Coherence replaces identity drama. Your inner and outer worlds begin to align without force. You do fewer things that contradict you. You stop needing to convince yourself that something fits. This message is not here to reassure you or rush you forward. It's here to confirm something subtle but profound. You are not becoming less. You are becoming more real. This is a subtraction process, not an addition. What falls away was never truly you. It was what you needed to be once. And now that necessity has passed. The fear you feel is not evidence of loss. It is evidence of attachment loosening. And once that loosening completes, what remains is simpler, steadier, and far more alive than what you were protecting before. As this subtraction continues, something unexpectedly stabilizing begins to happen. Without the constant effort of maintaining an identity, your internal world grows quieter. Not empty, quieter. The mind no longer has to rehearse who you are supposed to be, how you should react, or what this version of you needs to defend. And in that quiet, a different kind of presence becomes noticeable. One that was always there, but rarely felt, because it was overshadowed by performance, protection, and explanation. This presence does not ask for validation. It does not panic when definitions fall away. It simply observes, steady and unchanged, even as everything else shifts. This is often when people realize that the fear of self-loss was never about losing something real. It was about losing continuity. The mind prefers continuity over truth because continuity feels safe. It allows you to predict yourself, to explain yourself, to remain legible to others. When continuity breaks, there is a brief sense of free fall. But what follows that free fall is not disappearance. It is contact. Contact with something in you that does not depend on roles, achievements, or narratives to exist. This is why the process feels both unsettling and grounding at the same time. You are losing the map, but discovering the terrain. As you stay with this, you may notice how your reactions slow down. Situations that once demanded immediate emotional responses now pass through you with less friction. Not because you're detached from life, but because you're no longer protecting an image. When there is no image to defend, there is far less to react against. This creates space between stimulus and response. And in that space, choice appears. Not forced choice, not strategic choice, but natural response. You don't need to decide who to be in each moment. You simply respond from coherence. This is what maturity actually feels like. Not control, but congruence. You may also find that your sense of meaning begins to reorganize itself quietly. Meaning no longer comes from proving something, fixing something, or becoming something impressive. It begins to emerge from alignment, from living in a way that doesn't require constant self-correction. This shift can feel anticlimactic if you are expecting transformation to feel powerful or dramatic. But real integration rarely announces itself. It feels ordinary, stable, almost invisible. And that invisibility is the sign that it's real. You're not trying to feel authentic anymore. You simply are. At this stage, the urge to define yourself often fades. You become less interested in labels, explanations, or future versions of who you might be. Not because you lack direction, but because direction no longer depends on identity. It depends on sensitivity, on listening, on noticing what aligns and what doesn't. You trust this sensitivity because it has already proven itself. It pulled you out of an old life. It dissolved an outdated self. It guided you through the void. And now, it operates quietly, without needing to justify its intelligence. This is also when the past begins to lose its emotional grip. Not because you reject it, but because you no longer live inside it. You can remember who you were without feeling pulled back into that version. Gratitude replaces attachment. You see how that identity served you, and you let it rest. There is no need to resurrect it or argue with it. It belongs to a completed chapter. And completed chapters don't need to be destroyed. They need to be closed. What remains after this closing is not emptiness, it's availability. Availability to respond honestly to the present. Availability to build a life that doesn't require fragmentation. Availability to choose without betraying yourself. This is why the fear fades without needing to be resolved intellectually. The system recognizes that nothing essential was lost, only excess, only adaptation that overstayed its usefulness, only roles that confused effort with worth. You are not emerging as someone new in the way the mind imagines novelty. You are emerging as someone less burdened, less divided, less defended. And that simplicity can feel strange at first, because struggle once gave you a sense of identity. Without struggle, you may wonder who you are. But that question eventually dissolves on its own. You don't need to know who you are when you are no longer pretending to be something else. This is the quiet end of the fear you started with, not because you fought it, but because you outgrew it. The fear of self-loss dissolves when you realize that what remains after identity falls away is not nothing. It's you. Not the constructed version, not the defended version, but the part that was never threatened by change in the first place. And once you feel that, even briefly, there is no urgency to rush forward or look back. You understand that becoming more real is not about accumulation, it's about release. And what you've released was never truly yours to begin with. As this state settles further, you may begin to notice that your sense of urgency continues to dissolve. Not because life has become clear, but because the internal pressure to rush has lost its grip. The part of you that once demanded immediate resolution grows quieter. You stop needing to name the destination before taking the next honest breath. This shift can feel subtle, but it is decisive. It marks the moment when fear stops driving the process and trust begins to quietly participate. Not blind trust, not optimism, but trust in your capacity to remain present without forcing certainty into existence. You may also recognize how much of your former identity was constructed around tension, around anticipation, around managing what might go wrong. When that tension releases, even partially, there can be a strange sense of disorientation. You're not fighting anymore, but you're not celebrating either. You're simply here. And that neutrality can feel unfamiliar if your nervous system was shaped by intensity. Yet within that neutrality is a deeper kind of stability, one that does not depend on being right, prepared, or validated. It depends only on coherence, on not being split against yourself. This is often when people realize that the old self did not dissolve because it was flawed, but because it was overextended. It carried too much responsibility for too long. It tried to hold together structures that were never meant to be permanent. Letting it go does not dishonor it. It relieves it. There is compassion in this recognition. You are not abandoning who you were. You are allowing that version of you to rest, no longer tasked with surviving conditions that no longer exist. As you move deeper into this state, your relationship with the future begins to change as well. You stop projecting yourself forward as a way to escape the present. Instead, you sense that whatever comes next will require less force than you once believed. The future does not need to be conquered. It needs to be met. And you cannot meet it honestly while dragging the weight of outdated identities behind you. This understanding does not come as a thought. It comes as a felt knowing, a quiet agreement between your body and your awareness. You may also notice that certain questions lose their urgency. Questions like, "What should I be doing?" or "Who am I becoming?" no longer dominate your inner space. They fade because they are rooted in identity, not presence. In their place appears a different orientation, a sensitivity to what aligns in the moment, to what drains you, to what feels simple rather than impressive. This sensitivity is not indecision. It is refinement. It allows you to move without betraying yourself, even when the path is still forming. At times, this phase can feel almost invisible. There is no drama to point to, no clear milestone to celebrate. And yet, something fundamental has changed. You no longer feel compelled to return to what you've outgrown. The pull weakens. The nostalgia softens. What once felt essential now feels optional. And that is how you know the shift is real. Not because you declared it, but because your nervous system no longer responds the same way. Eventually, what remains is a sense of quiet readiness. Not readiness to act immediately, but readiness to respond when the moment arrives. You are no longer bracing for impact. You are no longer scanning for threats. You are simply available. Available to move. Available to choose. Available to live without constant self-negotiation. This availability is the real gift of the process. It is what the discomfort was clearing space for all along. You are not emerging louder, stronger, or more defined. You are emerging less divided, less defended, less burdened by the need to explain yourself to yourself. And while this may not look like transformation from the outside, internally, it changes everything. Because once you stop mistaking identity for self, there is far less to protect and far more room to live. The process is still unfolding. It does not need to end here. But something important has already happened. You are no longer afraid of becoming someone you cannot recognize. You understand now that what remains after the old self falls away is not emptiness, but presence. And presence does not need a name to be real. This is how the transition continues, quietly, steadily, without spectacle. Not by adding something new, but by no longer carrying what was never truly you.